Brilliant. Well, welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you again. We've got a really interesting couple of panels this morning. Yesterday we're focusing more on the European context. Today we're broadening out. We're thinking much more international, global. And we have an absolutely awesome panel for you this morning. Our first speaker is Elizabeth Pollitzer, who many of you have already met. She is an absolute superstar. She is the founder of Portia, which set up the World Gender Summits in 2011, and there have been 22 summits since then, and many more to come, which is really exciting. She's an evaluator and advisor to the European Commission, and really does bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise from both academia and all of the experience she brings from Portia. So thank you so much for being here. We also have Professor Rana Dajani, who is the Director and Chair of the Organisation for Women in Science for the Developing World, and a Professor of Molecular Cell Biology from Hashemite University in Jordan. And she was awarded by the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, which is a really prestigious award. And so many, many congratulations. And thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. And you can hear us, which is marvellous. Excellent. And then we also have with us this morning Professor Amal Amin. He's an Associate Professor for Nanotechnology at the National Research Centre in Cairo. And she's president and founder of the Egyptian Society for Advanced Materials and Nanotechnology, as well as being a co-founder for the Global Young Academy and the Egyptian Young Academy. And on top of all of that is also the founding chair of Women Without Borders initiatives. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks a lot. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning for all. Yeah.
So our topic this morning is gendered innovation and the international community. And I would really like to just start off by asking each of us, our panellists, if they would be happy to just give us some of their own reflections on what it is that's going on with the gendered research agenda within that international context. So would you like to start, Elizabeth?
I shall start it off. So the basic story is that probably 2000 and something, I was asked to help with a project that did meta-analysis of gender research in Europe. And I was asked to have a look what was done in the UK. And the target was to identify at least 1,000 papers. Okay, so that's a lot. So as I was doing this and reading those papers, I suddenly realized something very important, is that actually it was not just about women, it was really about science itself. So until then, Portia was set up by a group of women at Imperial College. Imperial College is technical college, so there's no social sciences. So you can imagine it was all men, really. And I was in the Department of Computing, which was, I think, maybe had only like 3 women, me including. So the problem of underrepresentation of women was always there. But while everybody was passionate about gender equality, nobody in the department actually tried to do anything about underrepresentation of women in that department or in general. So at the time, Portia was doing basically work on trying to attract women to ICTs. And I think I realized that the main problem was that was seen as an HR problem and not a science problem. So when I read all those papers and suddenly thought that actually it's a science problem, well, I managed to apply to European Commission for a project and had this really good, probably one really good idea in my life, to invite scientists to actually reflect on that evidence and to say whether that mattered to science. So they look at this empirical evidence and say, did it matter to science or not? It's a project, so it's their decision. And I managed to invite 14 science leaders, so they were vice rectors of universities, and also invited the editor-in-chief from Nature in order to attract those vice rectors of research to come. I think it took about 3 months. It was like 3 two-day seminars, consensus seminars. So he adapted the methodology of consensus conferences. And over the 2 days, they had to look at the evidence and discuss and say, did it matter to science or not? The first session was huge denial, okay? Nothing to do with us, okay? I said, it is to do with you. You make the decisions. You decide who should be hired. You decide what research should be done. And between you have a 500 years of experience. So that's a lot of consequences for women. We know it matters to women, okay? Does it matter to science? In the second session, they suddenly started seeing connections between things. So we had these big boards with lots of post-its on it going on. And at the third seminar, the final one, and they were responsible to write a report with recommendations. So they had to produce recommendations. Anyway, so they knew what their responsibilities were. And in the third seminar, suddenly they realized something that nobody actually expressed loudly up till that point. They said that actually in the evidence that they saw, there was much more data and evidence for men and for males than for females and for women, and therefore outcomes of research will be often worse for women. So as soon as I heard this, I suddenly thought, that is the way. This is the way to go and persuade the scientists that it's really all about the excellence in science. But I think they have done, having taken this problem as their problem, they have then written to the European Commission and said what the experience that they just went through should be repeated for other people because their evidence is very strong, and so it is possible to make improvements. And they wrote a report with 13 recommendations from science leaders to science leaders. And that also went to the Commission, and we thought, well, it's the end of the project. Normally you have to have an end of project conference. Why don't we have a big thing? Let's call it Gender Summit. And 460 people came to it, okay? We had like 60 sessions running in parallel. It was really, really big. And everybody says like, oh, I wish I was in that session. Oh, I wish I was in that session. So we knew we were on a really good thing. And then people came from around the world and to this particular Gender Summit. And so we also felt that that was really something that is a way for many different actors to talk about the issue of women without actually having to talk about women, okay? So the next Gender Summit, actually we persuaded the European Parliament to be the host of the Gender Summit #2. And the reason was that the Parliament was discussing budget for Horizon 2020, and it was quite clear that the proposal from the Commission had only one little paragraph on gender equality, and we were worried that because there is so much gender equality legislation in Europe that actually politicians don't care about excellence in science, they only care really how much science costs, so it's a big likelihood that this particular paragraph will disappear. So it was very important to show them that actually it is important that they keep this paragraph but also extend it. Someone talked about economic value of science yesterday. Right. The argument to the politicians had to be based on economic value of supporting gender-sensitive research. Anyway, that went all particularly well, and people came from NSF and from Korea and so on, and they said, we want Gender Summit in our region, which was really very important realization that, of course, they don't have a European Commission, they don't have a Horizon programs, and so they have to find a different way of doing it that is very sensitive to the local conditions and understanding, how science is really done in different countries in a particular region. So since then we have Gender Summit Europe, Gender Summit North America, Gender Summit Africa, Gender Summit Asia Pacific, and we had with Rana Dajani, we had one mini Gender Summit for the Arab world. Okay, so basically we have covered the world, a part of Oceania, But in 2024, we're hoping to have a gender summit in Australia, which is going to be Asia Pacific and Oceania. So we covered the world. Right. So I think that's, I think what happened is that, well, the advice to the commission didn't come from Portia, which is a tiny organization, okay, and basically works in agile ways in order to recognize opportunities and connect the real important agents of change. So we are quite good at that, okay? But we are not really, if I write a report to the commission, of course now they will probably read it, but anyway, in those days, I was really nobody. So the important thing was that it was the really very important decision makers who have realized the value for them and the value for science and the value for the policy in Europe and so on. So that kind of set the model for the gender summits. Each gender summit has to have a partnership of important institutions. They already have to come with some commitment to realize that the change is needed and a way that they're going to make change happen. And I think since 2011, change has been happening, especially in Europe, because in Horizon Europe now, organizations that get money from Horizon Europe have to have a gender equality plan. All the projects are obliged to at least address the question of gender dimension. Okay? You know, that is amazing, right? So obviously it's not only us, little organization, that has been pushing this, it's just the whole enough of really important people have taken this on and said, yes, we have to actually do this. We cannot go gender blindly into research and innovation.
Amazing. At this point, I'd just love to bring in Rana. Could you give us your insights?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I mean, I'm going to follow on what Elizabeth just said. And I was really excited when Elizabeth approached me with this concept, which I think is new, but yet old. And from there on, I also started working on this as a campaign. And I'll share my reflections on this issue to enrich the conversation. So first of all, to me, as a biologist myself, that celebrating diversity is how we evolve, how we survive, and not just multiple species on this earth to ensure an ecosystem that supports life in general, but within even our human species, that we need to celebrate that diversity. Every human being is different because their DNA is different, and we need them all in order to survive as a species and as a society. And when I say celebrating that diversity, I mean in every meaning of that word, in terms of not just mental capacities, health capacities, social capacities, emotional capacities. We need everybody to do their little part so that we can all, as an orchestra, survive together. And I think this concept that is not focused on a particular group is the shift that we are trying to create in the world, so that we can celebrate everybody and not call out people as minorities, but actually as natural parts and members of the community that are much needed. And in this context, gender is the main one, but we have others, right? We have people with disabilities, and now we're called neurodiverse, right? So we're even changing the terminology we use when we describe these different populations. And then even socially, when we talk about ethnic groups, most of the research is male-centric. Most of the research is about healthy people that are not have disabilities. And most of the research is Eurocentric. So all these are very focused approaches that have been enriching science, all from one perspective. And so the push of putting gender research in the limelight is very important, but it will also benefit all other types of diversity that we need to celebrate. Hence, I envision everybody has to be on board, because everybody has a stake in this, whoever they are, wherever they come from, because ultimately whatever we achieve from our gendered research approach will impact and enrich and add value to all of the others. So that's my first point in general. The second thing I'd like to highlight is, how do you do that, right? So these are really nice concepts, but I'm a doer. I'm a very practical person. And I think, okay, so what do I go home and do now? And to me, it's about thinking systematically. It's enough of short-term solutions and bandages to try to fix things, because we're always going to fall into the same thing. So it's about systems change. And when I say systems change, it's about addressing pivotal root causes where it's you go into an entry point that will impact a lot of things. So what are those? We need to sit together and identify those entry points. And already Elizabeth highlighted some of them to go forward. And I think that's the mindset that we have to think about. Second, it's about not just about changing policy. That's very important. But if the people who are implementing the policy don't adopt it internally, meaning their mindset has not changed, that doesn't guarantee the policy is being implemented. So ultimately, we're looking at changing mindsets. And the question is, how do you do that, right? How do you change mindsets at the level of the individual? And again, we can discuss different ways of doing that going forward. And Elizabeth already alluded to some of them, but I'm just trying to pull out highlights of how to go forward. And I'm going to end with giving an example of the importance of this with a fresh example. Elizabeth mentioned a few, and I'm sure many of you who've researched before coming to this panel to attend have already examples in mind. But I want to highlight one that comes from my research, and I think this is the future of science, especially in the biology sector, which is omics. Now we're in a stage of big data. And this impacts every aspect of our lives, from how cars driving without a driver to personalized medicine and robotics and artificial intelligence. So this is all based on big data that's been accumulating from gathering data from all over the world. However, we already know that most of this data is also Eurocentric, male-centric, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, however, it is being used to develop technology and tools and diagnosis and diagnostic tools for the whole world. And so we are going to fail. We are going to fail if we don't take into consideration gendered research to fix those flaws and those biases quickly, because if this becomes, all the results of this becomes set into the system, it's very difficult to change them. So we are at a pivotal point of making this entry point to make a difference, to save humanity on the long run. And I'll end here with one of the milestones that we can actually use to our advantage to get the whole world behind us is achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The only way to achieve them is if we adopt this approach. And make it clear why we need to do it for the reasons I just talked about for the big data. I'll stop there, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I think that some of those points have really resonated with other themes that we were talking about yesterday, particularly that idea of the frameworks we put in place now will ripple into the future. And if we get them right now, then we've got hope. And if we get them wrong, we're on a trajectory that is going to be very difficult to steer the ship from. Thank you. Amal, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It was my pleasure to meet Elizabeth in World Science Forum 2017, and Rana is my friend, and I think we have similarities between us in the point of view. But for me, the story with gender issues began very early when I decided to get outside my country and studied abroad. By the way, in Egypt, we have about, in the scientific community, we have the percentage of women is more than men, sometimes in some research institutes and so on. So that for me, from the beginning, I had no such problems of gender issues or something like that. And also my supporters were from men and so on. But when I went to outside Egypt from the early career, I found several challenges. But at that time, I didn't focus on gender issues and so on. I just referred these problems, that cultural differences and so on. And afterward, when I returned back and decided to transfer technology and so on, and then I went to the real scientific life. And I began to found several communities outside Egypt and inside Egypt and so on. And then I encountered with the gender issues. I really thought about gender issues. If it's a problem, if it's really a problem, or it's something like social problems or something like that. But I think The changing point was when I co-founded Global Young Academy in 2010, when we decided to focus how to change the world with science, so that we discussed every point with respect to scientific communities, with respect to the reflection between scientific communities and the society and so on. So that we found that we have similarities worldwide in the gender issues, that there are several problems maybe different from environment to the environment and so on, and according to countries and so on. But from my personal point of view, I thought it's a miscommunication, or it's a problem of communication between the people in scientific community themselves, not only between women and men. But usually the scientists focus on their achievements, who focus on their records and so on, so that maybe they ignore in the way both the young scientists and women scientists as well. So that we found that one of the Nobel laureates said sometimes that presence of female scientists in the lab, it's a bothering matter for him, because the women scientists may be not productive like the male scientists and so on, and sometimes they are emotional. So that for me it's a matter of communication between the scientific community themselves and the people in scientific communities themselves, and the miscommunication between the scientific community and the society, and scientific community and the policymakers. It's my thought that it's a bigger problem, not only gender issues, but it's miscommunication between the science and the society itself. So that I decided to found a small working group inside the Global Young Academy to focus on these problems and identify them. And finally, I founded the Women in Science Without Borders. It spreads now in 67 countries, and we are concerning in this problem, how to connect the people and the world with science, how to involve the women and men in the same template, how to facilitate communication, how to facilitate collaboration in practical way. I am a chemist, so that I am pragmatic, so that I am practical. I am concerning about the products, how to be practical, how to produce something on land, not only talking, because as you see, that long years, we have several funds for women in science, we have several projects, we have very supportive issues and efforts to support women in science. And we still have problem of women in science. So we have to stop to speak about women in science. We have no problems, actually. We have miscommunication. I think that. And we have to start to produce something practical. That's why I founded Women in Science Without Borders, to connect the people and the world with science in practical way. How to involve stakeholders from all disciplines and from all levels, and policymakers, journalists, even press and youth, and the people, the normal people, and the science themselves, whether males and females, and the young science, all of them, how to discuss in practical way, how to solve the problems, the bigger problems, the sustainable development goals, and so on, in practical way, how to suggest real solutions and real projects, how to solve the problems in a bigger way. It's some kind of inclusive template. We have to have gender sensitive or gender responsive template to allow the people to talk to each other, to brainstorm to each other, and so on. And it's my point of view with respect to gender issues. Accordingly, we made several meetings online and in person, where we made World Forum for Women in Science. It's organized annually. It was organized twice in Egypt, and one in Brazil, one in Kenya, one dedicated for refugees and scholars at risk. It was held in Iraq, in the Hawk University, and the next one will be in Malaysia. And we made one youth science forum, and we made several online sessions and mentorship programs and so on, so that we hope to produce something on land. And for my personal perspective, I would like to omit or to remove this term empowering, because we are not weak. We have to communicate with each other, and we have to make initiatives like this to collaborate and interconnecting with others. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think what's really fascinating about this is that there's an angle on this, which is that gendered research is just necessary for doing excellent research. It's so important if we want the research to be good and if we want it to have impact. And yet, that's not enough. We need to find those pivotal root causes that Rana mentioned, and we need to win hearts and minds at the individual level, which I think Amal was touching on. So I was just wondering, from you, you've got very different perspectives on this, but does that resonate? And if so, where have you seen it work well? That you know, what works to change hearts and minds?
Well, researchers feel that if they publish really good research and it's published in a high scoring journal, that's a job done. Okay, someone else will pick up this stuff. No, someone else will not pick up that stuff. And Sustainable Development Goals is really a very good example of it. Half of the goals have no gender indicator or no gender targets. SDG 7, which is energy, okay, it's about improving access to affordable modern energy, okay? Access is a gendered word, okay? It is about power, right? Who controls this access to energy? Affordable, it's also gendered. What does affordable actually mean? Why does SDG hasn't got a gender target or gender indicator? It should at least have in the wording of SDG 7 and all those targets, there should at least be mention of women who live in poverty, and what affordable means to them, and etc. So the Elsevier has done some analysis of research for SDGs, and the findings are shocking. For about 9 SDGs, the amount of research that actually asks questions about gender is about between 1 or 4%, okay? So for energy, SDG 7, only 1% of papers, studies, actually ask questions about what does access mean. Okay? So first we need research for SDGs that actually takes the gender perspective. UN Women have now realized and actually are advocating that gender perspective has to be integrated into all the SDGs. Okay? So how are we going to do that? Yes, it has to be done. Clearly we need more research in these areas which have been ignored, but also in the areas where it is available to actually use it to inform implementation strategies and actions. However, when you look at how the SDG experts analyze interlinkages between different targets or SDGs, and they do this because you can be much more effective if you achieve something that actually addresses several targets and also makes it cheaper. They completely ignore SDG 5, which is gender equality and women's empowerment. Okay, so they look at each SDG, how it connects, and targets, how it connects to other ones. And it's actually absolutely shocking to see that SDG 5 has been completely marginalized. And but in Elsevier report, there's like 95% of studies for SDG 5 look at gender, as you would actually expect. So there are definitely issues, and I think people are beginning to realize those issues. And so that's where the communication has to come. Yes, that basically we have to connect science, society, and policy. That was an advice from the Global Sustainable Development Reports, which monitors the progress on achievement of SDGs. And their recommendation was that the only way we can achieve SDGs is if we have a stronger connection between science, society, and policy. Okay? And there you can bring quite a number of different stakeholders. Unfortunately, UN Women have identified 122 indicators for gender. There's 169 targets, okay? So they don't cover all the targets. But for the great majority of them, there's no data because nobody has been collecting data. Yes, the most countries have no sufficient quality statistical capacity or even tradition to collect gender data. So that's a big problem. But also it's one of the problems that actually stops the SDG specialists to think, okay, we need to have a look at their at SDG 5. What they do concentrate on is on the harmony between policies, okay? And in many cases, like certainly in Europe, there is a policy of mainstreaming gender into policies, okay? Including into EU budget, okay? But it's not implemented, which really what Rana Dajani has been saying. Yes? So, I mean, the job now is we had a One Gender Summit Global for SDGs, and I think this is the thing now. I think we really have to push. It's only like another 8 years of SDGs, yes? There's not really that much time. Hopefully there's going to be another program afterwards. So if women are left behind now, they certainly shouldn't be left behind in the next program, yes? And I think, so we need to try to use, yes, to cover the, basically help UN women to integrate gender perspective into all the SDGs, yes? Help to inform scientists that actually they really need to do things from a gender perspective as well, and help policymakers that actually they have the responsibility as well, because just saying that you are sensitive to gender, it's not enough. You really have to implement your policies. So we are in a critical stage, and something that connects us internationally is those SDGs, yes, because otherwise women will be for sure left behind.
Thank you. Rana, can I just bring you in? Because in your context, what is it that you've seen that works in terms of connecting the importance and then not only capturing the heart, but also getting the doing in people?
Yeah, so this is important. And I think one of the challenges that faces us in conducting research that is gender focused is really nuancing what we're talking about. Many times when the word gendered research comes up, everybody assumes automatically we're talking about gender equality in the traditional sense. And maybe I'll give an example, if Amal allows me. As Amal was speaking, all my triggers and bells immediately went to gender equality and not to what Elizabeth was talking about. And that's how most people perceive gendered research. And so they immediately draw blank and say, oh, that's not for me. That's about those people, the feminists and what they're talking about. This is not what. And so this would be the immediate knee-jerk response of policymakers, all males, by the way, and everyone. And so we lose on the whole point. So I think to unpack it, and because we as this panel and what we're all working on is not about, we believe that we need to have gender equality, but that's not what we're working on. Somebody else is working on that, right? And we need to divide our forces, our strategies, so that we can achieve it. Yes, gender equality is one of them, but that's not that's an overarching theme. What we want to focus on is gendered research, because this is a very smart approach to get everybody on board, whether they believe in feminism or not. It's not about that. It's about what's in it for me as a male, what's in it for me as a policymaker. As Elizabeth alluded, they don't really care. But this approach of gendered research, but unpacking it and making clear what it's about, will get everybody to back you up. So I think that is one of the most important steps that we need to focus on. Right? Maybe use an image, unpacking it, give an example, give this contrasting example that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about this. And immediately people's barriers drop because okay, it's not about feminism. So I think that's number one. Number two is, again, the other approach, smartly, is using the SDGs, right? So again, we're not talking about feminism. We're talking about SDGs. We're talking about poverty and all those stuff that everybody's interested, whatever sector they come from. We're just adding, a way to make it better, stronger, So again, using that kind of language, that kind of strategy, that kind of approach will get people behind us and supporting us. Because ultimately, it's not about a group of people wanting it to happen. What we want is that mindset. So we want everybody to feel that they have a stake in it. So how do you foster that feeling of responsibility and agency that this is important for me? And I need to, get on that train, otherwise I'll be left behind, is I think the smart strategy that we need to think about. And in this context, I also want to raise the point of, other than getting all the policymakers and all the different stakeholders on board, I want to go back to the researchers themselves. Most researchers don't even realize this glaring gap of gendered research. They just don't know. So it's not that they don't want to. They're not aware of it. So again, it's about unpacking what it means. Because most people, when they hear it, goes above their head. Oh, I'm a biologist. What do I have to do with gender or feminism? So again, unpacking it for the scientists themselves, because ultimately they are the ones producing the evidence. So whether a policymaker enforces it on them or not, it's their decision to do it. So they have that kind of autonomy if they are aware. So another strategy is, how do you raise awareness among the scientists themselves to get it? Right. And so this could be through producing calls, making it fancy, talking about it to your students, making an award for research that is gendered research, and explaining what it is, and then giving an award to the scientist that does that kind of research. And so scientists will start doing it because they're excited and they want to win the award. But that's how you flip and you highlight and you increase visibility to those kinds of scientists. So award is a really smart way of getting people excited to do what you want, but they feel they're doing it for themselves, right? So it's all about psychology. So those are some ways of doing it. And lastly, I want to highlight, we can learn from other groups who have created movements for other reasons, for us, how to create a movement to have a paradigm shift and to shift mindsets globally, because this has to be global. And I want to, and maybe not just to learn from other movements, but to join forces with other movements, right? Instead of recreating the wheel, but to piggyback on existing networks and movements. So one movement I'd like to highlight is Catalyst 2030, which is a movement based on a network of social entrepreneurs globally that are working together to achieve the SDGs, each in their own kind of SDG. But they are a group of doers, and they have started something which they've called the People's Report. I'm on their board, by the way. It's just a network of people. And this People's Report is about the people on the ground, the grassroots, reporting on the SDGs from their own perspective. So again, that's another entry point to make sure that gender is part of that, gendered research, not gender as feminism. And that way you produce more evidence from the people to use it, because also you want the grassroots people, the people on the ground, the layperson, to start demanding this for their own safety, for their own health, for their own better life. Because if I'm going to start driving a car that's automatic, I want to make sure that has been tested on females, right? If I want to use a personalized medicine, I want to make sure, like a COVID vaccine, I want to make sure it was tested on females. So this way you put the power in the people's hand, those especially in democracy countries, because this is not a global South versus global North problem. This is a global problem. And that way, when you put the power in the hands of the people, they can start demanding the policymakers. So again, you're gating those stakeholders to come and join forces with you to start demanding this kind of research. But ultimately, to me, the first step is to understand and package what this means, to make it simple and to reach, and not to be confused with feminism.
That's such a clear and beautiful way of putting it. I think that's so helpful. And I think often when we do end up in sort of complex situations, it's often because we're talking cross purposes and words mean different things to different audiences, and it can take a long time to unpack that. So I think that's incredibly insightful. Amal, I'm just wondering, from your perspective, working with all the organisations that you're working with, where have you seen this? When does communication work well? Can you give us any examples from your experience of that?
I would say first about gender issues. In some communities and some societies, if you talk loudly about gender issues and repeatedly, maybe you will create against against campaigns and so on, and maybe the people themselves ignore you. Because as examples, they don't see these problems in Arab region and so on. If you concentrate and focus on speaking loudly about gender issues and so on, they will say that you are a feminist and so on. So that at first we have to change the mindsets. We have to change the way of thinking, that the gender issues and the inclusion, it's not problems of females only. And to pay attention of the society to this problem, to how to ignore 50% of the society against 50%, how the inclusion it's better than male dominant societies and so on. And I think it's the first rule of policymakers themselves. That's why in Women in Science Without Borders, we bring all stakeholders together, including policymakers, because usually the scientists complained about that policymakers don't listen to them and they have miscommunication with policymakers and all policies, not including science inside the policies and so on. So that we have to include policymakers inside the movement. That's why we always in Women in Science, by the way, the theme of Women in Science Without Borders is Science for Sustainable Development. Because if we look to the Sustainable Development Goals, like Elizabeth said, we will see that all goals, almost all goals, must be implemented in the presence of women as the principal player or key player. Because if we look to energy, to water, and so on, especially in developing countries, the most affecting person of the deficiency of energy, deficiency of clean water, and so on, is a woman. Because as a mother or wife or even sister and so on, the woman, the most affecting person. So that we have to implement the woman inside big system, not alone or just a feminist to talk about the women problems and so on. That's why in all my movements and organizations, I insist to involve the women inside the system, not apart from the system, not to talk about women problems. We are talking about society problems. We are talking about world problems. That's why I told you that we involve women in science inside a complete movement where policymakers can listen, even journalists, because sometimes the social media and so on maybe highlight problems that the society itself may ignore, like harassment. As example, in Egypt recently, we had several package of laws, very pleasant laws against harassment, sexual harassment, and so on. It's the action of social media, it's the action of journalists, the press, and so on. So that if we want to solve the gender problems, we have to involve the women themselves inside the system. We have to work not only on the global level with respect to the UN recommendations and so on, but we have to reach the local players themselves. We have to speak on the level of the local players. We have to connect efforts, like Rana said, and we have to connect the movements with each other. That's why I approach almost all the movements working on the same direction. And I really aim them, and also the power of stakeholders and the press and the media to encourage the efforts for gender responsive policies and so on.
Thank you. Elizabeth, did you have a
Yes,
comment?
I just wanted to comment. I think the social justice, in my experience, the social justice argument does not work in science, okay, because it is just pushed into HR departments. The talent argument does work in science, okay, because and the other argument is, why evidence to show that actually the presence of women in the lab matters, okay. So there are studies that went and observed what happens in the lab when there are women and men working together. When everything goes well with the experiments, there's no difference, because we have protocols, you have to do methodologies, because you're going to write research paper, so it all has to be pre-planned and you have to follow what you have planned. But experiments often go wrong. And that's where the difference happens, okay? So there are studies that show how men deal and women deal with when experiments goes wrong. Did we choose the right hypothesis, okay? Should we understand what actually happened? Maybe there was something wrong with the equipment. Okay, all those questions you have to ask yourself. Have we forgot about some risk? The answers are completely different. Yes, basically, women want to dig in and want to understand why it didn't work. Okay, men says, okay, this doesn't work. Let's try another method. You need both. Okay, you need to actually ideas and you need to understand and so on. So this is the kind of evidence that says to decision makers, yes, that it's good to have a diverse teams. The other way the word diversity comes in is if I go with a very well-structured questionnaire to interview someone in an ethnic group that it's not like me, they will give me one set of answers, okay? If someone goes in with the same questionnaire but is in that particular ethnicity group, they get another set of answers, okay? Hence, you need to really be very cautious, how you interpret whatever answers you get. The other ways that talent works is that, so someone was talking yesterday about spin-offs, and actually from Blue Sky research you get spin-offs, indeed you do get, but women don't get access to that. So in big science, I have been recently working with women in ITER project, which is the fusion energy project, that if it's solved, then we all forget about energy issues. But anyway, it costs huge amounts of money. And together there are also various large, big science infrastructures where people go and use very expensive facilities to do the experiments. So there's a question of access to these facilities. Yes, do women and men have the same access to these facilities? And they don't, okay? So, because it's very competitive. And there's a program of research funded by European Commission called Attract, and they are basically about taking discoveries that were done in this kind of infrastructure facilities and bring them closer to the market so they have become products. 170 studies have been funded. Only 11% of them are run by women, okay? But the problem is that 60% of the studies have in mind an application, life science, health application, okay? 60% of doctorate degrees in Europe are achieved by women. So we have more women capable of doing this research in life sciences. Somehow only 11% of them are funded. So where is it? And then if you look at the research, if they are not there, what kind of applications are being envisaged, yes? And so on. So these are the kind of arguments that you can bring to policymakers, certainly in Europe, and say, look, you are missing on talent, and women are missing on opportunities, and you cannot say they are not there. They are there, okay? So there are some barriers in this process, in the system, that you have. There are definitely barriers against gender equality, okay, or with all the intersectional aspects as well. So for me, these are the kind of arguments that work. But if I go to someone and say, 50% of the global population are women, where are they? Here. It's just completely like nothing to do with me. I'm just about excellence, I have to publish papers and so on. So yes, so I think it shouldn't be really difficult to create really, the strong arguments that target a particular agendas, okay? SDG agenda, excellence agenda, slight problem with industry because they're really concerned about getting into markets. They're not really concerned about proving excellence. And I can give example here that works for everybody just to show that. But I don't know if we have time.
Please, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So example that works with everybody is about cars, okay? There was a study in America that looked at the 20 years of accidents record and to see how women and men drivers, when they strapped in, in the seat, what happens in a car crash. It concluded that women have a 48% higher risk of injury, serious injury, than men. Okay? So basically cars are less safe for women, even though women drive in a more safe way than men. Worse than that is that recently a study so the complaint about that study was that 20 years of lots of old cars, hence there are the differences. But recently there was a study in Sweden that looked at the cars that were produced after 2009. So the risk for women went up to 70%. Okay? The reason is that the cars are designed for men, all right? Men drive fast and recklessly often, okay? So the seat was redesigned to be much harder to hold the man in position when there's a car crash. 3 things happen when there's a car crash. The car goes into barrier. Second crash, your body crashes into the inside of the car. Third crash, all your organs, brain, heart, everything else, jumps around inside your body. The woman's vertebrae are much smaller than men's, and they're separated by slightly higher distance than in men. And of course, the bones and everything is smaller. So what happens in a third car crash? The body gets shaken like in a trampoline, and the patterns of injury for women in the real car crashes and in the car crashes that are tested in the labs where the crash test dummies, they just don't compare, okay? Because all cars are tested on male crash test dummies. They just shrink and pink the dummy to make it like a woman, okay? But it does not represent that. So, and at the same time, women have to pay exactly the same insurance on car insurance as men. Even the cars are less safe for them. There are all sorts of questions that come up. When people are trapped in a car crash, there are differences in the injuries for women and for men. Women suffer more injuries with the pelvic, while men suffer, and spine, while men suffer more head injuries. Yes? Which probably shows you that how fast they were driving. But then does this compare and it's translated, all those things, into a prevention, building roads that are safer? No, because roads again were designed for men, I guess, because women didn't drive. So men used to go from work to home and so on fast. Women make different trips, they make several trips. You have to drop off children to nursery, you take your mother to the hospital, that sort of things. Men don't do this. So the safety of roads is definitely also biased against women. And then if something happens in the crash, there has to be a response. There has to be a response from the medical and the firemen and so on. So are they prepared to the fact that actually they're going to have to get a woman out of the car or a man out of the car, and because the injuries are different, is the situation going to be worse or not? So you can unpack all these things in such a way that you can see, is science doing the right thing? Is industry doing the right thing? Is society really benefiting from this or not? And who in society is benefiting? So it's a kind. So you can actually take many examples, including nanotechnology, and then kind of unpack this in a way that shows you that if science is biased, that innovation is biased, then society really it does not benefit. Women and men do not benefit equally from science. And they are taxpayers, they pay for it. So why shouldn't they expect the same quality of outcomes?
Amazing, thank you so much. I'm just aware of time and we've got a room of incredible people here. I'd love to open up the floor to ask questions to our speakers.
I have one comment on Elizabeth.
Come on. I think it's a comment.
I have one comment.
Who's speaking?
Yeah, I have one comment. I like your arguments, Elizabeth, but sometimes you need to pay attention to the people, because usually if you don't complain, nobody will pay attention to your complaint. You understand me? It's a matter of awareness. That's why if a matter we must talk about. As example, I found in all my life that the people or women specifically sometimes have several complaints and they keep it, because in Oriental countries and so on, if you talk loudly, sometimes in the past, not now, if you talk loudly, they will have some impressions about you that you are hard, you don't accept the laws, you are revolutionary and so on. Maybe now the situation is really changed. Severely changed. But it's a matter of paying attention to this matter and this complaint. That's why the industry till now, all the products and so on is male dominant, because we don't complain. You understand? We don't complain. We don't talk about our needs. We have to talk loudly about our needs, about our biological needs, about our rights. We have to ask for our rights, because rights are not given. Rights must be asked for.
Thank you. Thank you. A couple of questions.
So thank you very much for this very nice panel. So usually when I am asked, for example, so I usually complain that we as scientists do not work with policymakers, for example, or we maybe don't care much about it. But then when someone asks me, okay, so if you had the chance to enforce a policy change at a national level, for example, I come from Colombia, so if you were asked the president, you need to change this and enforce this policy, what would it be? And then I go blank and I'm like, okay, so I keep complaining about this, but like practically, I don't know what kind of law could it be implemented to ensure diversity or equality in STEM in science in the country. So I just wanted to ask you, from your different cultural setups, if you had the possibility to actually enforce a law or a change at the policy level, what would it be?
Okay, I actually can give an example where this happened through the force of a network of women in South Korea. Okay, the reason it happened in South Korea, we have been working with this group for a few years, and they hosted Gender Summit in Asia Pacific. Traditionally in South Korea, women scientists do want, or it happens that they spend some time as politicians in the National Assembly. When they are there, they develop very strong networks with men and women politicians. Okay, then they go out and not necessarily into research, but to do other things related to science, and they have a very strong network and they support each other. So when the Gender Summit, they thought that they should have a Gender Summit Asia Pacific. I was invited about twice to come to National Assembly to talk about gendered innovations, but they organized that. Yes, there's no way that I could have that sort of access. And so they used this to gather support from the policymakers for the idea that actually it is not just about gender equality, because they have that legislation already, but it is about science, quality of science, and gendered innovations. And it's a way for South Korea to move away from the model of huge corporations into more innovative culture, which is more dynamic and responsive to society. After about, 5 years of this, they suddenly now have in the legislation that funding for research and innovation has to include the gender dimension. So one thing I would advise you is it takes time, okay? It has to be evidence-based because policy has to be evidence-based, and there has to be not just a policy brief issued, that's not going to get anywhere, but it's to create this, connect these agents of change, which are the committed scientists and really aware, open to ideas, politicians, and then working together. Yeah, so our approach in Europe was to go through the European Parliament and European Commission because that's where the decisions are made. We had the Gender Summit Latin America, and I think there is so much diversity between countries you cannot actually prescribe. The last Gender Summit Latin America was hosted by Brazil. That's completely different to Argentina, etc. And it's so controlled by men and the very clicky things. So, to break that, it's really quite difficult. But you really need to find a politician who can have an open mind and just talk and persuade and so on. When Norway decided to have a law for women on non-executive roles on boards, like the whole men establishment thought the economy will collapse. The reason it happened is that one of the politicians in high position felt excluded from the kind of top level inner circles, yes? So he asked for a study to see who controls power in Norway. It turned out that only about 50 people, all men, control the power, invisible networks, okay? They didn't have to meet. They just simply knew each other and what was happening. And so he decided to break this invisible network. Economy in Norway works absolutely fine. And the reason is that the government decided that if women are going to join the board, they're going to get training on what it is to be on the board. The quality of the board improved. The men realized this, and then they asked to have the same training, okay? So basically, I think without finding politicians with power and decision-making capacity, who can listen to the argument, and I think the social justice has to be phrased really, really carefully. I think you really have to get them. Even in the European Parliament, you have to find. There are so many different parties. You have to find the parties that can work together, and then together they can just move, say, okay, we must host gender summit in the parliament. Otherwise, it's not like, it has to be some consensus, reasons. So, so it is slowly, it is possible to change it, but it takes time to create a legislation. Okay, that takes time.
Rana, did you have a thought?
Actually, no, I know we're running out of time. I was going to kind of highlight what Elizabeth said about concrete steps, because as she said, different cultures, different contexts, different things. So there's not one recipe fits all, but there are general guidelines. And as she said, find a good advocate and include policymakers, because you want them to be in the government to advocate for it. It's not about I tell them what to do. It's about them owning it. And that's very fundamental. So create those networks, even if it takes a long time. 2, choose a low-hanging fruit. You're not going to change the world. Do one little thing and focus on it, and let the policymaker guide you, what matters to him or her, and let them choose that, and whatever argument fits them, whether it's the SDGs, the qualities, the excellence, whatever. And then you build on those little successes as it go. And it has to be very context-specific, culture-specific, country-specific, as Elizabeth said. So I think those 2 approaches is what gets you there. And I don't know if we're ending here, but I only want to say that also, change takes a long time, and real change takes time. So I think when you set yourself up to know that that's going to take a long time, then you're not disappointed. And you think, okay, what can I do as an individual? And do not underestimate what you can do as a human, as one person. Elizabeth is one person, and she has moved the world. And she has all brought us on board with her. So yes, one person can make a difference, but it's about, doing concrete small steps that add up on the long run, which is the chaos theory in physics, right? It's when a butterfly flutters its wings, it moves the wind 1 centimeter, there's a hurricane in time and space beyond that we can imagine. And in Arabic, we have a saying, our ancestors planted and were eating, and we plant today for the future to eat. And this is similar. We are preparing the ground for the future so that when the future generations comes, they build on what we've done.
Wow, that's a really beautiful way of putting it. I think, how to be good ancestors, whatever's part of the journey that we're on. We do have a bit more time. So there is another question.
Yes, so thank you very much. My mind is blown. I had not looked at the issues in this genders innovation and gender-centric approach. So for me, my problem, or what I'm just about to say, is kind of unique, and I'd want to hear your thoughts about this. So my work really involves around women and their sexual and reproductive health and general outcomes, i.e. in the matters of the contraception they use, matters of their susceptibility to infections such as sexually transmitted infection, and how the biodiversity losses that are driven by climate change influences the general microbiome. I guess the biologist really resonates on this, and how big data, omics, plays a role in this. So one of the aspects I'm looking at is HPV vaccination against cervical cancer. That's one of the many problems that I am encountering. And I have a group or a community of women, particularly very cultured women, and most of them have this Catholic-based faith where they're against anything to do with sexual talk and anything to do with talking about that girls and children having sex, for example. Because when you're talking about HPV vaccination and creating awareness, we have to talk about the sexual and reproductive health. So one of the challenges we get is actually from women themselves. Like, what are you talking about? Our children, our daughters are not going to have sex. So we don't want even this conversation to take place. So how do you deal with, can I say, that barrier that's not even coming from men? In fact, the men are on board on this, but actually from women who do not want this conversation at all to take place. So as women from different cultures that we have here, how do you go about breaking this barrier? And I'll probably ask the other questions later during tea. Thank you.
Rana, would you like to kick off on that one?
Yeah. So thank you for this wonderful question. Some of questions, like Amal said, people don't ask. We need them to be asked and brought out to the open and have an honest, open discussion about them, however difficult they are, right? And that's the hallmark of a scientist, right? We are ready to tackle those difficult questions. So my advice on that, because that happens across cultures, not just Catholic, everywhere. And but the context is different, right? But the approach, we can agree on approaches, and one of it is to listen to them. We always assume that we know what they want and why they want it, and so we build assumptions and conclusions and ways of approach based on our assumptions. And I think the first step is for us to be humble and to listen to them, really listen. So sit and engage. First, you learn more. You understand why they're thinking that way, and therefore you understand the entry points to dispel those arguments. 2, you give them gratification. They feel that they're listened to, that they're validated, that they are important, and that they're not just silly, or they really, because these are the words that are talked about them, right? Or backwards, or they're stuck in wherever they are, they're not advanced. You give them respect and allow them dignity, and you listen to them. And that by itself is the first barrier by listening. Then they are open to listen to you and to listen to your arguments, because you're actually going to where they are, holding their hand, and then you're walking together. Thirdly, do not underestimate how much we don't know, and we will learn from them. Learn from them in ways we don't know. Again, it's similar to the gender issue that men think, oh, what are we going to learn? There's much to learn from people who believe in a different way or think in a different way. If we keep an open mind about it and not being, that open mindset, that growth mindset of how can we work together? Because ultimately we need them. We will not be able to enforce any change, any policy, any adaptation or take up of a vaccine or anything if they're not on board. So it's not about you have to do it. I don't care. It's not about this is the evidence, you have to believe in it. No. It's like Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. I'm sure you should read that book. It's about if the people don't want it, who am I to force them to do it? Then I become the oppressor as well. So it's about going to where they are and walking with them and learning as you go. And they become your champions, by the way. And they will help you find entry points to other problems and other challenges within that community. And so you don't have to do all the work anymore. And you've raised the capacity and the awareness of the whole community because you have taken the time to listen and to learn from them. So this is just general advice on how to do it. And then I will learn from you. When you do that, we want you to give us a panel and tell us what you've learned and how we can do better work together.
Thank you. Ilan.
Yes, hi, this is Ilan Shem from the Elsewhere Foundation, and I'm so enjoying this panel, and it's such a pleasure to hear from Rana Dajani, who I've met several times in the past, and to hear from Professor Amal Amin, and of course Elizabeth, whom I've worked with over many years. I have a comment and a question, but first I just wanted to say that in the Netherlands, where I'm based, the Dutch Ministry of Health now vaccinates boys and girls for HPV, and that, and of course there was a whole debate, even in the Netherlands, which is very secularized, about the kind of issues you're talking about. But recently my own son started receiving, come and get vaccinated. So I just wanted to say this is another approach to kind of neutralize this issue. So my comment is about gendered innovations. And this is a program that has received waves of European Commission and National Science Foundation funding, I think 2 waves. And it's been spearheaded by Londa Schiebinger from Stanford, but there's an army of researchers who have helped to develop case studies. So if you're not familiar with this work, go and take a look, because what this work has done, representing so many countries and examples, is to create a body of case studies. And so what you start to see case studies about gendered innovation and examples for both women's health and men's health. And what you then see is that often the cases around men's health, men also suffer from breast cancer. It's understudied, or depression and PTSD. And so some of the examples, and we have amazing examples about women, about heart disease and under detection and lack of research because the symptoms present very differently, et cetera, et cetera. Great stuff there. You see that it creeps into speeches of policymakers because they can get it. I can get it. I'm a layperson. And this is just a real, these are riches. And I guess my question about it, and also just kudos to Elizabeth and others. Rana, you were using a lot of examples as well from this kind of work. Elizabeth, through the gender summits, you've helped to really publicize it. You've given it a platform, and I think all of those involved have gone out and talked about it. So it's an idea that's really come of age over the last decade, from what I've seen. The question is, where is that now? What is being done? I mean, clearly it was recognized at a European Commission funding level and a CEF level. Is it now, okay, we did that, check? Or is this going to be, and I don't know if you know the answer, but I'd be so curious to hear your thoughts on this, because this kind of evidence is just worth gold for all of us.
Well, Elsevier can tell us. You just have to monitor, how many papers are being published that look at sex and gender. She figures, which is the best indicator for what is happening to women in science in Europe, has been going on since 2001 or 2. Now it's the last one was for 2018. So that reports on the statistics, on gender statistics in universities and employment related to STEM subjects. But also for the last two editions, it also looks at the studies with the gender dimension. So, and Elsevier is the one who has developed methodology to look at the body of the literature there, and it covers like all scientific reports published in journals and others, to see whether is any, how does it developing. Now, actually the proportions are very, very small, yes, but as we would expect, okay, so it takes time for researchers to be able to do this research. First, there has to be funding, okay? Then they have to be educated also, so the curricula have to change. They have to actually understand the issues. And we cannot assume that just because you bring more women into science, suddenly they understand how to do it without anything changing in the curriculum. So this is now already starting, that there has to be a change in the way that people study. I have given some talks at UCL in London to medical students on health issues and gender dimensions. It was a new thing for them. They didn't know it. So it's still not being part of the curriculum. If they're not trained, they go with the same gender blind lenses into research. So there have to be opportunities at PhD level, and there has to be, when you publish, so journals have a responsibility when paper is submitted, that actually it's expected that this issue is said, yes, it matters, or it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter, why it doesn't matter. The funders have to be prepared to accept papers as potentially excellent, even if they have a sort of a talk about sex differences. And this is all beginning. The German Research Foundation now has got a guidelines for researchers how they should approach this in their application, and they allow 3 scenarios in which it is relevant. So they are not prescriptive, but they're at least showing that it's expected. Of course, the the European Commission through Horizon Europe now, in Horizon 2020, they identify 600 topics over, I don't know, 30,000 that they felt that gender is relevant there. Now it's not like that. Now it's obligatory, so you might be, it actually says when it's not relevant. So there are a very small proportion of calls say you don't really have to talk about this, but you have to talk about social impact, okay? So I think we are at the stage that we probably will see things coming out from now on in terms of the impact of it all, yes? And I think the next she figures will show the difference, because it will be another 3 years. By that time, hopefully, out of Horizon Europe, there will be research papers coming out. And it will show there should be at least some increase in the percentage of studies with a gender dimension in it. In the Nordic countries, the research funders, they simply accept that you have to require this. So hopefully that will also help what is happening in Germany. I think, of course, in some countries, it's still, depends who is in charge of the funding, yes, whether they feel it is really important. And I think SDGs will make a difference, because I think now everybody, including funders everywhere else, feel that they really should do something about SDGs. And the Times Higher Education, there's an initiative from Times Higher Education that they actually monitor performance of universities on sustainability, SDGs, and one of the criteria is the research with a gender dimension. So I think we went through 10 years really pushing, but I think we're coming now to the point that we probably are going to see results, and I'm just hoping that at the end of Horizon Europe, which we're talking 6 years from now, it is just going to be the norm. We don't have to sit here and keep on justifying and persuading. We just, like, at least the scientific community will see that it is part of their responsibility. Yes, so I think I'm hopeful after 20 years.
As you say, a science problem, not a women's problem. Rana, sorry.
Yeah, maybe one also to add another incentive. What I mentioned earlier, maybe you, somebody in the audience, or this is something we could explore together, Elizabeth, is about creating an award with criteria. And it could be at the level of the scientist who's doing gender research. And we put the criteria in a way that we're nudging people towards there. So everybody, if you want to win the award, you shape your research to apply the criteria. So it's a reverse psychology in a way. And that could be a word at the level of the scientist, at the level of an institution, at the level of a department. And then that way you slowly shape the policies of those departments, because you're dangling that carrot to attract them all. And it's not about the money. It shouldn't cost a lot of money. It's about the prestige of winning an award. So hooking it to some fancy event, or piggybacking on a big thing that's happening, and using it as a strategy to change a little bit faster, to accelerate, because people, everyone, we're all human and we love to win awards. So that's one way. And we've been very successful in doing it, to do a paradigm shift in funders for a whole different reason. But we can learn, right? So part of ideation and design is to learn from similar situations. What have people done to change mindsets, and learn from that and adopt it for this particular change that we're seeking. So we created an award in Catalyst to shift the paradigm, the mindset of funders, to become long-term funders, to have unrestricted funding. So all this, but what we did is we created that award. Anyone who starts working that way will get the award. So everybody was scrambling, from MasterCard to Gates Foundation. Everybody wanted to win the award. And the award is yearly. And it's about nudging them. So at least there's a pipeline of change. If you can demonstrate that you want to change, if you've changed your policy. So it's a very flexible and open kind of criteria. And that way everybody can start thinking, okay, I win the award in 5 years and I'll start implementing these kinds of changes going forward. And that would be part of what the award offers, that if you want to, this is what you need to work towards. So in a way, you're creating the whole framework to help those institutions bring about the change that we want. But we're helping them by doing their work and giving them an incentive.
Amazing, thank you. If anyone hasn't read Nudge by Taylor and Sunstein, definitely get that on your Amazon wish list. I think that's a really powerful insight. I think we're out of time, unfortunately. I think we could ask you questions and keep this good discussion going for a long, long time. I want to thank you all so much. You have given us such wonderful insights. I think there are so many things I'm taking away, but I guess one of the things I'm taking away, as you've been speaking, it just really strikes me that I heard this only a couple of weeks ago, but this idea that if you want to be a change maker, you need to keep your mind as open as the sky and as sharp as a needle. And I think that is something that really comes through from all of our panelists with such clarity, the way that you have been able to view the world, but focus and then build collaboration and bring people with you. And you are changing the world. So thank you for changing the world. Thank you for being with us today. And I hope we're able to continue these conversations. Thank you.